Alrighty. Dadgummit, I forgot my clicker.
Go get it.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. Alright, we're going to talk a little bit about functions. I know everyone just had a cow with the functions where when you put a certain type of HTML element inside of quotes, it didn't want to work for you. But it does. How is that? Why is that? Anyone know?
Because it's expressed language. Or explicit.
Well, we'll get to it. Methods are basically procedures that are inside of an object. The object being the method. Pretty straightforward. A function is what we call this particular statement or statements that are inside our script element. Does it make sense? Everyone following me? I know you've seen this before. So if I create a function, I'll have a script up here and a script below it, okay? Function name. How many of y'all have had any programming classes? Your fundamentals of programming? Y'all remember what a function is, correct? All it is a method where you can pass information in and out of and do your mathematical formulas. In this one, we're going to have a name of function, and this is, in parentheses, our parameters, which is what we would pass to and from. Okay? Now, we can pass strings, integers, floats, whatever variable we want through that parameter. So, for example, a method name would be calculate underscore square underscore root. So what would we assume that this is going to do? It's going to calculate our square root, right? But if you're calculating square root, why do you need three numbers?
Well, would you do square root of three different numbers?
No. Why would you think you would need three numbers? If you were looking for a square root of a number,
what's the word? There's three different ways to do it, right?
Is it you're giving, you have to give some information and it has to return some information?
you could use it that way. You could square three numbers if you wanted to, but it's just showing you as an illustration here. You're never going to square three numbers, or take a square root of three numbers. You'd have to have a number to square root. Now, if you're trying to square root a number, or square root three numbers to make a use the Pythagorean theorem, you can do so. Because remember, three numbers, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, the Pythagorean theorem. If you're trying to figure out what a, b, and c are, this is how you can pass it to it if you wanted to. Defining functions. Still no show?
No, I found it.
Oh, okay, good. Function statements. You do the actual work, and they're going to contain functions and braces. Okay? Here's our braces. We have our function, which is a reserved word, which we can't use, correct? Print student names. What do you think it's going to tell us to do? We're going to print some student names. Student 1, 2, and 3 are what's being the variables that are being passed into this function. So what we do is document.write. Why are all this lowercase? I remember from chapter 1?
This is case sensitive.
Case sensitive. Anything in here is uppercase, you've got an error. So document.write, and in dual quotes, you put P, not singular quotes. We're writing the HTML tag. Are y'all with me? Then we add the student variable, and then we write the closing element, or the closing tag. So that once this function is executed, all this function will kick back to the HTML document is P, and whatever the value is of student. That's what gets kicked back to the HTML document. HTML document will then read this and say, okay, this guy's in a paragraph, this guy's in a paragraph, and this guy's in a paragraph. Does that make a little more sense now? A couple of you had questions on that particular issue. That's why I was stressing that. Now's the time to ask the questions. Don't be afraid.
So if you didn't have that, would it just print one right after the other?
Yeah, it would just print student, because it's a right, not a right line. the last letter of the first variable here would be right next to the first letter of the second variable. Because it's just a right, not a right line. Right line will give you that carriage return to put it down to the next line. Does that make sense? To execute a function, we've got to call it. It's like I got to call John to get in touch with him, right? I can't call Brittany to talk to John. If I call Brittany's number and I'm trying to get a hold of John, that's not going to work, is it? But I've got to call John to say, okay, John, we're going to run this function. And he goes, okay, I can do this mathematical figures for her. He's my accountant, and he makes $10 million a year off of me. So anytime I have a receipt, I say, here you go, John. And he does all my calculations. I don't have to worry about it. He's a rich guy. You like that, don't you?
Make it rain. Yeah. I have the coolest computer ever.
Exactly. Consists of functions that are followed by parentheses, and then contains the variables like we showed you. You have your function, function name, and then in parentheses what variables will be passed to or from another function or an element. Right? Arguments. Those are the values that are in that parameter. Pretty simple. Whatever's in the parentheses, those values are what we call an argument. I wish they would quit throwing extra terminology into things. You say it's a variable in there, leave it be called a variable. Don't call it an argument. Even though it's an argument of this function, it's not that John and I were arguing over my taxes. It's what I passed to him was an argument. It doesn't make sense, does it?
Yeah, that kind of confused me because
Sure.
I would expect an argument to be more like a conditional statement.
Exactly. You would have a instantiated statement where you're expecting some sort of response. And in a way, you do get that response because it passes the variables to it. I just don't like it the way they call it an argument. But I'm a nobody, so they could care less whether I want it changed or not. Passing arguments. Basically, all you do is you say what arguments, variables that are inside that method or that function, you name those, and that's what the pointer that gets pointed to. Does that make sense? Did I lose everyone there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Basic programmatic stuff. I have my function name, Scott, and I'm passing it stu1, stu2. Okay, those are all I'm passing. Inside my function, I can call stu1 and stu2. Right? I can set it to be whatever I want in this function. These values here then can get passed back to here to get passed out back out to the global script.
Is this what I was asking about last night?
I don't know. I've slept since then and had a migraine, so
I think so. Because you told me to wait. So.
yeah. Yes,
For
TJ.
it to get passed back, though, you would actually have to tell it to return that, right?
Yeah, you would return stu1, and that's the statement that you use the return for. By default, all arguments that you have in here are going to come into this function. If you need to return a value back out so that the global program or the global script can see it, you have to do the return statement, which we'll get to in a little bit. Does that make sense? Well, actually, we're just talking about return now. So, I got A, B, and C. I brought them in, right? So I did the sum of numbers is equal A, B, and C. I've instantiated or declared my variable sum of numbers. But I'm also instantiating it by telling it the value. Because when you declare, or I declared a value, declare my variable, and then I can have my assignment statement, right? But in instantiation, you have both of them in the same sentence. Does that make sense? We talked a little bit about that last week. Now I'm going to create my variable of result. I'm going to take my result of my sum of numbers, which is right here, divided by 3. So whatever I can call this function after I get 3 inputted from the users. Or if I declare A, B, and C up here being whatever they are. I'm going to return the value called result. I don't put it up here, but it passes it back when you have that return statement. Here's what I'm returning out of my function. Does that make sense? Rennie, you look confused?
But could you pass?
Anything.
Even you could say return A.
Yes.
Okay.
If I call A in here, yep.
Well, you have-
Because I've already declaring it here.
Well, I'm not saying you'd have the same set of statements. I'm just saying that
I'm just using
you
this
could
as an
change
example.
A.
Exactly.
Okay.
Even after I got sum and result, I can change A equal to 0 and return A, and
Okay.
value going back would be 0.
Okay.
John, you okay? Did you get it? Or
Well, I don't think that's, I didn't think that was right, but, because you didn't set a variable, you don't have a variable named A.
well, you would up here.
Oh,
So yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you declare it in the global program. You're passing A, B, and C. So when it says Scott is looking for stu1 and stu2, I'm actually looking in the main program for a variable stu1, stu2. I can also say var int stu1 right here and declare it inside of here if I wanted to. But if it's not declared in here, it's got to be in your main program or you're going to have a compile error.
but that's not in the example.
No, not in this particular example. No, it's not.
Alright.
This is just showing you the function itself and how you would return that function.
Right, but what you were saying, you were telling her that you could return anything. You
Yes.
could return A, but you can't return A unless you.
Unless-
as a variable.
right, unless I put it in here as a
Unless you
variable.
have different
I can
statements.
return sum of numbers if I wanted to because I've already declared it in
Because
here.
that's not, that variable, that sum of numbers
Uh-huh.
in the result, that only exists inside that function bracket.
That is
right?
correct, and that's what
So
you can
can't-
return.
So it could return out of that, but you can't, like, just,
Well, you could
You would
return,
know that.
return A and it nothing's happened to it, and you get A.
you can't
Same
return
thing.
A, you don't know what A is.
No, you would
If
get A
you've
right
been
here.
given A,
This is already declared in here because it's declared up. It's a global variable outside this function. It gets the value gets passed through A, which we're determining in here. That's why you have A here, A here.
Right, A, B, and C are inputs.
Right, but you would have that input value already in here that you can call and return that value back out if you needed to. There's no reason to because this function is going to be to manipulate it and get the use for it.
Okay.
I'm just saying you could return it if you wanted to, but why would you create a function to return something that's already a global variable?
I don't, yeah.
only if.
There's
That
no
example.
need.
But you could change it inside.
Oh, exactly.
Say if it were a name and you wanted to change, if it's.
Okay, here's just an example. Inside this function, let's say we're going to open a database and close a database connection. I'm going to send my closed database connection as a return back so the global can close it. Does that make sense? I can send back any value I want. But you have to have that return, and then whatever you're sending back in semicolon, and you're good. You can have 15 returns if you want. But usually you only want to deal with one return.
Okay.
Keep it simple. Yes. DJ? Is that you that had the question?
I'm kind of confused.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Which maybe I'm thinking too much of regular Java.
Uh-huh.
But typically, you would use something like this to call a method that you have in the
And this is the
in
method.
the class,
Uh-huh.
not in your main method.
Right. This is a separate method, a constructor method for Java.
Right. But
Okay.
the variables.
The variables
there
are actually
completely different from what
they're
you're
going to be in your main
calling.
method or your class. They can be in either or. And you're just calling those variables that have already been defined in another part of your program into this function to manipulate them to return some value.
Right. But you're actually passing a value and not the variable itself.
That is correct.
So, does this work a little differently than that then?
No,
If A,
it's
B, and C
identical.
are Global variables?
These are global variables right here.
Okay.
You're calling A, B, and C I could call it John, Scott, and Victor if I wanted to. But it makes it easier to A, B, and C so you can use it directly.
Okay. So it's not a case where you're calling it and it has different variable names inside of the function.
Yeah, we're keeping it simple at this point. Yes, you can change those, and that becomes a pain in the butt if you're trying if I ever come across a coder that changes in a function, the variables inside the function, like, well, I pass A, B, and C. If you change it to Scott, John, and Victor, I'd shoot him. Because it is a pain in the butt to try to find the relationship here on these pointers when you don't use the valued input that you're calling. It's just bad programming. That's why I'm
You
going to
have
shoot him.
to, like, put, Huey to A, Dewey to B, and
Now, if he's done that's fine. I'm good because I can see the trail. But he has to define it somewhere. If he defined it in the main program and I'm looking at this function and it's two different things here, it causes confusion. You don't want to do that. That's why you have to put your comment statements in there, especially anytime you create a function. You need to tell me what this function is going to do, how it's going to do it. Sometimes 90% of your program becomes the comments for the 10% of the code. Especially if it's a complex like algebraic formula, when you're like the CBO does with the national debt and the national budget. You know, it's not like our checkbook, which just has a single plus and a single minus, or in my case is always red with the parentheses in it according to the bank. Y'all like that idea? Just saying I'm poor. Variable scope. It's when we can have where you have this variable defined. Simply put, that's all it is. The scope of that variable. Brittany's phone number is 555-5555. Okay? Hey, now I can write a Hollywood film. I got down the phone numbers, right? Okay. Global variable. It's going to be a variable that is outside of that function. Now, that can be passed into that function. This is what we're talking about. A local variable is something that is declared inside that function, to be used only inside that function, and will require var. Like we had var, variable sum of numbers, variable result. Okay? And you can still send anything in the function back out. I hate it when they put the slides in reverse order. Okay. Good programming technique is always to use a var in front of a variable when you're declaring a variable. Why? It's easy to define them, easy to see them. Or identify, not define them. And it clarifies it. Poor programming techniques makes them harder to identify if you don't have variable in front of it. So if you just var int whatever, var float whatever, var boolean whatever, I can easily say, okay, find me all the vars. So I can go through straight down the program and find all my variables. It makes it so much easier, especially when you put comments in there to tell me what you're doing.
Now, wouldn't you want to declare all your global variables at the very top?
Yes. Always, whether you're in a function method or you're in the global method, you always want to declare all your variables at the very top of each one. Well, in the function, you want to declare them in the top of the function. If you're in the main method, you want to declare it in the top of the main method or the global variables. Good point. Thanks, DJ. All right.
Well, I was actually more curious if that was something that was different in scripting,
No.
because there are certain things that are,
There are smaller things that are different between Java and JavaScript, and we'll get to them a little bit later on. At the beginning, it's all going to be just basically a rehash of Intro to Java. But the further along we get, then that'll be more easily identifiable for you. How many of y'all got my emails today? Like all 30 of them?
today.
Yeah.
I didn't check it today.
Yeah, you might want to check it. I updated practically everything.
was
I don't know if you got 30.
You mean
Notifications,
notifications?
emails, they come through the same thing.
Yeah.
I updated a lot of things in here.
None of them showed up in my Gmail for some reason.
So what I'm going to do not do the comprehension checks, which I already told you. I've already given you all the grades for your comprehension checks. Don't do the unit test. I've already given you all the credits for the unit test. The only things that we're going to do in here is a final exam and the review exercises. However, we're going to do the review exercises in class. So you don't have to submit anything to me. I don't get tired of grading, Karen. Because I feel that it's going to be better for you to... The Dropboxes will still be there if you want me to review something. You can put them in the Dropbox. I'll review them and tell you where you screwed up when you're writing your code. If you screw up, that is. Like Bryce, I'd be spending 2 days talking to him about his code. All right.
Is this in D2L that you put out this information?
Yeah, when I grade everything, you should be getting automatic emails now that they've changed their way. And I think it's stupid. I think you should be able to choose not to receive the notifications, not receive an email anytime an instructor grades something. Because My wife hates that, and I hate hearing her hate that because I hear it on both sides. It's bad enough coming from y'all, but when my wife, I hear it all the time. Okay. I can't do anything about it, but okay. All right. Variables. Again, here's our global. Then we have our function down here, right? We actually have, we have our function here, and then we call the function. So in here we have a variable called pitcher Josh Beckett. The function is going to be duplicate variable names. So inside this function, the variable name pitcher is going to equal Tim Lincecum. So when I call this, the value that's going to come out is Tim Lincecum. Okay, I guess this guy is a Boston Red Sox fan and a San Francisco fan. Then I call the function duplicate variable names. Why do I not have function outs in front of it? Anyone know? If you put the term function out here in front of when you're calling it, you're saying I'm creating another function. The word function is only used when you're creating the function. So I just call duplicate variable names, document write, print the picture. So what does it do? Why is it printing Josh Beckett instead of Tim Lincecum?
Should change the
Because
value.
it changed it.
What changed it?
Changed the value.
No, because it's going to declare the global because you didn't do a return on the function and the variable only exists within the function.
That is correct. Why? Because even though I call this function, it'll print out the Tim Lincecum, then Josh Beckett. That's exactly what it's going to print out. You know why? When I call this, it's going to print out this function. So my value is going to print out Tim Lincecum right here. But then I come down here and I created a document write statement where it shows my global variable that I set equal to Josh Beckett will print Josh Beckett. You'll see the difference now? Brittany, you okay? Do I need to redo it again?
No.
You sure? This is the time to ask. I just want to make sure that I'm not losing anybody.
I'm always like 5 steps behind everyone.
I'll get 10 steps ahead and you'll be okay.
Never gonna happen.
Okay, let me ask a question.
Sure.
Why were there not 2 names printed?
There are. There's your result.
Oh, okay. All right. Gotcha.
Okay. Here's some JavaScript functions that are already built in. You can decode URIs, encode URIs. You can have evaluate expressions. See, I can evaluate my expression just to see what these are more debugging type tools. I can check, is it a number? Because what would be a good function for that? If I'm calling is a number, is my value that was returned by the user a number? If so, then I can keep on going with my loop maybe. And if it's not a number, then I can quit. You know, it's just type a number to continue or press any other key to quit.
Well, or maybe you've taken a string and you just want to perform operations on the numbers in that string.
You could do that too. I can come down here and I can start parsing it, looking for integers or strings or floats or whatever. Okay. Whoops. Now we have certain data types. Okay. What is a data type? All it does is declare what type of variable you're going to have, whether it's an integer, boolean, float, whatever. We have our certain primitive type of variable. You have a number, a boolean, a string, unidentified, or null. Pretty straightforward. You either have numbers, you have a boolean, true or false. Strings can be anything, more characters. Undefined, if I don't ever have a value and I'm not going to assign anything to it. And then null is just an empty value. Why would you want to have a null? Null values are good when you start an array. Because all the values when you declare an array are null. Okay?
Now, on that part of it,
Sure.
just to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, in JavaScript, you don't actually assign that when you declare a variable. It does that automatically, correct?
When you assign what? The null?
Well, the data type in general.
No,
just
you
do var.
no, you have to declare whether it's an integer, float, whatever.
Okay.
Because you have to know what type it is in order for certain functions to work.
I guess I missed that somewhere then, because it seemed like every time it was declaring something, it just var whatever.
Yeah, it's always going to be var, and then you declare whether it's an int, a character, float, decimal, long, whatever, and then the variable name.
But he hasn't had us do that yet.
Who hasn't?
The
Oh, no, we're not to that level yet. We're just talking about the data types now.
oh, okay.
You'll start getting into that here in maybe next chapter. All right, null value. It's a data type and it has a value, but it's useless. It's just a point in memory. Undefined has no value and not even null. It's blank. It's white chalkboard. Okay. You can use null or you can use undefined to see if there's any data there. You can't use null because null just means it's garbage. Because if I say is null, is there something there? Yeah. So let's look at some data types. Variable state tax. Okay. Your state tax is whatever the state tax is, print. State tax is 40. What will I get when I do this? We get undefined. Why? Because I did not put a value for state tax prior to. That makes sense? Undefined value. Document right. Your state tax is state tax. State tax is null. What am I going to get?
40.
40. Why? Because I've already defined it right here. Then I get document right. Your state tax is state tax. Your state tax is null because I've already defined it as null. Does it make sense? It's where you define it at. You got to define it before you use it. Would this pass a compiler? Absolutely. Why? Because I defined state tax as a variable before I started using it. Any questions? Okay. There are two different types of programming languages. You have loose and strong. All right. Strong require you to say var int ... Loosely just say, you can say var whatever, and you don't have to, or var Scott, and Scott could be a string, it could be a float, it could be a boolean, it could be whatever. Does it make sense? Everyone with me? Okay. JavaScript is different in Java in the fact that I do not have to define what my integer or what my variable type is. It's nice to, but you don't have to because JavaScript will automatically figure it out. Where's that dangerous?
You said you did.
I meant you. I always got them backwards.
Okay.
Java you have to. JavaScript you don't. This is a loose.
Just when you got it, you don't.
I told you I had a migraine earlier today, so I'm probably going to get stuff backwards all the time anyway. So I could put in here differential types as hello world. It'll say, okay, it's a string. If I put diff types as 8, it knows it's an integer. 5.3, float, true, null. All right. JavaScript only uses 2, integers and floats. It doesn't use longs and doubles. All right. It can be, an integer can be positive or negative without a decimal point. You throw the decimal point in, it's a float. Okay. Floating points also are used with exponential notation, scientific notation. Why? I've never known a scientific notation to actually end in .0. Right? End to the whatever power is going to be. Could be whatever. Logical value for true or false. What are some ways you would want to use that, Anthony? Besides looking at the variable and seeing if it's good or not.
Being out of a loop.
Loops,
Or if statements.
if statements. Exactly. And The reason JavaScript is a loose language is because what it does is it takes that Boolean value and converts it to its binary format, whether it's a 0 or 1. What's false in binary?
1. No, 0.
Zero.
Always a trick question. Variable new customer equals true. Variable contractor rates equals false. New customer is new customer. Contractor rates, contractor rates. What am I doing? All I'm doing is printing these two right here. Printing true and false. Text strings. They will contain nothing to infinite. You can make them as long as you want. They are literal values. Okay? An empty string is a string of nothing. That would be your nulls and your unidentifieds. So when we start getting into the array functionalities, that's what we're looking at.
But it said not to be considered.
Yeah,
Not considered
no,
to be null.
that's true. Your literal values will never be null or unidentified.
What?
Your empty strings, like a string is a string. It's going to be a literal value. That's all it is. Whatever's in it is what it's going to get. You will not have a string that is unidentified or null. Well,
Because it has a value. It just,
undefined. I'm sorry, not unidentified. Undefined because doesn't have anything in it. Now they don't want you to confuse the empty string with a null or undefined.
So what is a,
Empty string,
oh, what's a
you'll get a
string?
0. Do what?
What is a string, literal? Or literal
Little string. Your name's John. So if I put John in quotations, it's a little string.
So why would that not be text string?
Because a string is just text. It's all characters. It can be numbers. It can be anything. A string is just an element or a point in time and space. You can fill it with whatever you want. But if there's nothing in there, like sometimes you'll go in and you'll have you'll come up with a couple, let me show you a couple different elements. If I come up here and I don't put a space in there, what do I have?
Space.
Nothing, right? It's literally nothing. It's not null,
Right.
and it's not undefined,
But it is a string.
but it is a string.
Okay, so
Is
just
it-
the presence of the quotation makes it a string.
Right.
Yes,
Okay.
it can be the same thing. Except this one's going to have an actual hex value to it because it's a character. Does that make sense now?
Yeah.
To include quoted strings in a literal string, you got to surround it by double quotes. Here's what it's saying. If I'm going to use a quotation, like Scott is dumb, that's my quote. I have to use singular here because I have to do there to store that entire thing.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
And you don't have to use an escape character for that?
Nope.
What will print, single quote?
Hmm.
What if you wanted a double quotes?
Switch them.
To print. Oh, just switch it?
Whatever you start with, you got to end with it. Okay? This is a literal string. Prints that out. This string contains and when you see these, don't get confused. It's not the inner key. That's where a lot of you were screwing up with. This whole thing comes out on, it's just a word wrap so you can see it on here.
That's
It's a
bad.
carriage return, that's all it is.
It's bad form. Bad
Very,
form.
very bad form in how they wrote this. That's why I hate this book and I hate these slides.
It actually messed me up the first time I did it.
It missed every one of them, so
Finally
don't.
found- Because I think the
They have
note
little
that said
notes.
that was like off to the side
Yeah.
somewhere, and I
Well, there's
missed it.
important things in those notes.
Then this string contains a quoted string. See how we've got the quote in there with the singular quote? If I wanted to switch it around, the string is an example of double quotes. Put the singular on the outside, the double's on the inside. A single quote and a double quote mean the exact same thing, you just can't use them side by side. So if you want to quote a quote a quote, then you just keep adding the next set. Because how many times, when you're quoting scholarly work on a website, the scholarly work is quoting someone else and you're using that quote, you have a third level quote, right? So what I would do here, let's say some scholar says that I'm dumb. Then I could do here, and it would print just fine. Because I'm quoting this quote is quoting this quote. What you do on one side, you got to do on the other. Okay? First string, if I assign the first string, this is a little string that was in quotes, all it's going to print is the string was assigned to a variable. If I put it in singular quotes, it's going to do the exact same thing when I do the document write. Alright? That's just showing you. It'll write either way. I just hit the single quote because it's easier instead of having to shift key it all the time. Have I lost everybody? Okay. String operators. Destination Honolulu, location Hawaii. Destination is now going to equal destination is in what location. So what did I just do? I'm concatenating. That's what this plus means. I'm adding these three components together. The value for destination is in location. And I'm assigning it to destination. Don't put that in a loop. Compound assignments. I can do it this way. The destination is Honolulu. The destination is now going to equal, is also in Hawaii. So I'm going to print destination equals destination is in Hawaii. Basically, when I have the plus equals, I'm saying the exact same thing as that line right there. So you don't have to type destination twice. It's what we call compound statements. By the way, your final exam in here, you're going to write a web page with the functions. I'll give you some sort of web page and say, okay, I'll intentionally leave errors in it, and that'll be what you've got to do. You got to fix it.
So we're actually writing it, or
Oh, yeah,
basically debugging it?
Both, because you're going to have to put in some your own functions. I'm going to give you two. I'll probably have like 5 functions in the program that I'll set up, and I'll make you write 5 functions, and then you got to call all 10 and make it work. And it'll be simple, like the square root function or this function, all sorts of stuff. Getting user inputs, changing it, modifying, returning it. That'll be your final exam. And no, I'm not going to put any Perl, PHP, Python, or anything on your final exam.
Are we still going to be doing that?
Yes. I'm trying to get through all these chapters quickly, and then as soon as we get done with these chapters, you'll be back in a programming mindset, and it'll be easier just to cover. And then I want to do the last 3 weeks or the last 4 weeks before finals. I want to cover one language each week, and we'll do your project in class. I'll talk for about 20 minutes. You'll do the project. Because I've already given you the sheet to show you how they correlate. So if I say I want this particular type of tag, you already have that sheet, so it should take you no time at all to do it. Does it make sense? The difference between the other 4 languages you're going to learn and this one is this one's client side, the other ones are server side.
The other ones are server side?
Mm-hmm. They'll have to have a server. Java is the only language that can be run on your local machine. Be pushed down. JavaScript. Well, Java too with JREs and stuff like that, but because everyone has the Java uploader, but not everyone has a C++ compiler. So you put it on server and run it from there to run your apps that way. That's why they call it a server side. But we'll get to those a little bit later on.
JavaScript could be run off the server as well if they.
It could run on the server, but it will not be a server side.
Oh, it won't?
No, it is a client side. It gets rendered on your client. Your client reads it. Because your client reads the web pages. JavaScript, 95% of JavaScript deals with web applications. You can have other uses for JavaScript, but it will always render on that local machine. You can run the program that you start from your server, but your server will then be a client machine running it. You can't connect to it and then do the stuff. Does that make sense?
So as far as like the other programming language or scripting languages,
Uh-huh.
do those have to interface? That are on a server? Do those have to interface with the database?
Not necessarily you can use them to interface with databases, but they have their own, like, if you go into the VM that I've set up for everybody, Strawberry Ruby actually has its own compiler. And it has to be run in that compiler in order to function. So you would run it as an application on an app server so that the code can be sent in and run it that way. That's why it's on the server side, because it has to take that compiler. Where JavaScript is non-compiled based. Does that make sense now?
Not any better, but
Okay.
That's all right. We're not there yet.
Yeah. We'll get to it. You'll see the difference when we get to that point. You'll see that when you make the change, you can automatically hit F5 and it's coming up on your website, right? That's why it's client rendered, is where you have programmatic rendering on the server. Okay. Escape characters. The escape character in JavaScript is a backslash. All right. If you get stuck, just keep holding down the backslash. Where's that a good thing? Infinite loops. But you know what's also cool about that? Is after I hit that, I can start putting SQL injections into it if it's not a validated field. Why? Because it's on the server side, on the client side. Then, with that backslash, I've now stopped the JavaScript from running. I can put in what I want. If that web app is connected to a database.
So in a running script, you can hit the backslash.
And it'll stop the script if you're running JavaScript.
That's something completely different than what I was thinking.
Oh yeah, that's a security part of it.
Well, escape character, I'm thinking, so that it knows to print that literal character instead of.
Yeah, you can also use that as that, but it's like Control-C. It works that you can do that a little bit later. Here's some of the if you're trying to do a specific type of function, like a horizontal tab, form feed, null characters, whatever you want to set it up to be. All it does is say, hey, this is what I need to do. If I want to print a backslash, it's backslash backslash.
So
All an escape sequence does, and I'm sorry to cut you off. All an escape sequence does is say, hold off. Here's what I need to do. So you can use it to breach things in any language, whatever that language escape key is. But go ahead.
okay, you have an escape sequence.
Uh-huh.
Actually print double quotation marks.
Yes.
So what would be the difference between doing it this way and doing it that way?
Float your boat.
It's a matter of preference.
Float your boat. Yeah. Whatever you want to do. You can use arithmetic operators, assignment operators. If you have an equal sign, you are assigning a value to something. Just remember that. If you put an equal sign, you're assigning a value. Just as simple as that. Again, you're going to have comparisons. That's when you start getting into multiple equal signs. Strict equal, I've never used it, but it's a way to check and see if something is really equal or not. Your logic symbols, your ampersands, your or statements, which is your braces. Why is there only one exclamation point for a not?
It would
So
undo
you
itself.
It's either not or it's.
It would
not
undo
not.
itself.
It'd be double negative.
A not. So that would be a positive, right? That's why they don't have. That's why they don't do that. Ors give you this or this. That's why you have two bars. And this and this. That's what it means. I always love pulling that. You caught me, Karen. Darn it. Okay, binary operators. Binary requires something before and after the operator value. Urinary, and I'm not talking about heart attacks or anything. You can either have it or after. Okay? Rhythmic operators, we know what those are. Pluses, minuses, divide, asterisks, right? Modulus, which are your remainders. Arithmetic operators, you can do it all sorts of different ways. The whole number of 6 goes into 15 twice with a remainder of 3. All it's doing is finding out what the modulus is and then print out the modulus result with the remainder.
So, is that a true modulus, or is it just a remainder function?
Modulus is just remainder. All it does is tell you what the remainder if after it divides out between two numbers.
Right, but
That's all it tells you.
can have negative numbers in there.
You can't have a negative modulus.
Well, but you can have a modulus with negative numbers in the computation.
It won't let you. Modulus is just a remainder. It'll take you one down from what your division result would be and then give you the remainder. That's all it will do. But you won't have a negative number. Not with modulus.
I've just run into that situation before is why I was asking.
Yeah, modulus will only give you an integer value return.
Like in Java, there's a separate function for that.
Yeah, now you can have moduluses with
Right.
negatives, but that's a library that you have to add in or import in, the math library. The arithmetic value, basically, you give a variable, say what it's equal to. Pretty simple. Assignment statements. Now Java can take strings and convert them to numbers too. So if you say John plus 38, it's going to take you the value of John and add 38 to it and assign it to it and tell you what it's going to be.
Well, it would just be concatenation at that point, wouldn't it?
Not if it's not in quotes, no.
Okay. So
Because it takes it as a hex value.
Okay.
Not the hex value. It takes whatever the hex would be, converts it to decimal, and then that gives you a number.
So if,
Which, by the way, riddle 1 deals with that. But anyway, go ahead.
is there like a default value? Because I understand like if you don't have the quotes around it, then it's, if it has the quotes around it, it's a string.
Mhm.
Is there like a default? So if it's
I've
John,
never known to be a default, but I'm not saying there's not.
well, you said like, if it's John, they're going to interpret it as what?
0. If there's nothing there, like an empty string, is that what you're referring to?
No, like var, let's see. Hang on. Oh, okay, I see. Plus 38, you said?
Yeah, like if I say John plus 38, it's going to take since it's not in quotations, it's saying, give me the value of John, add 38 to it, and assign it to whatever the variable was.
So John would have no value. so
Exactly.
38.
No, it'd be a hex. It takes the hex value of it and converts it into a decimal number.
Now, are you thinking of John being in quotes?
No.
So John,
If you put John in quotes, it'll be John, and then you concatenate 38 to the end of it.
right.
Then you're making a string statement for it rather than it being a numerical statement.
Right. So,
Okay.
so it interprets John as a hexadecimal
Yes.
value?
Yes, that's how it adds them up.
Okay.
It gives you some weird numbers that you take 38 away from, and it'll tell you what John means. But
So would it be like similar to the ASCII values?
Yes, exactly. It takes. That's what I was looking for. The ASCII value.
That makes sense. to
Yes.
me. In hexadecimal, I'm like, why would it do that? 17?
No. I meant ASCII. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. I was trying to think of the word.
Like J times O times H times N?
I don't know if it does it that way or if it just adds them together. That I don't remember. I mean, every time I've never really
Somewhat
used that function.
irrelevant, I was just kind of curious.
Yeah, I've never really done that to see whether it's a multiplication or if it's even division or subtraction or addition, whatever. But it gives you a value for John.
You can test it.
Now, if you do it by itself without adding 38, it'll probably just record it as a string.
Even when they're what?
Right.
So why? So if it's is it okay? The UTF-8, we have to put that in the declaration string in the HTML. UTF, that says that is the UCS transformational format. What I think that is. Why do we have to do that?
Because that tells you how to do conversions.
Why can't we just use ASCII?
UTF works with ASCII. I mean, they're basically the same thing. It's just a universal language for it, is all it is.
Okay.
I think UTF picks up a lot of
There's
characters, in
special
foreign
characters.
languages that we don't have in ours.
Like German, Chinese, Japanese, Mandarin.
Like Unicode.
Yeah, that's basic. It picks up all of them. Like when you do your symbols in Word and go up to the symbols area to add a symbol into Microsoft Word, that's all in UTF.
Okay.
It's just a bigger character base than what ASCII is. Does it make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Increment, decrement. You do the double plus, double minus. If you negate something, it's minus. What's the difference between plus plus count and count plus plus?
Plus plus count will change the value before you perform an operation. Count plus plus does it afterwards.
Very good. That's why when you get into for loops, you need to make sure you do count plus plus or I plus plus or plus plus by I or minus I, however you're going to do it. Because I'm assigning, when I do plus plus student ID, that's a very common mistake, hitting the extra plus. So what is that going to do if you only hit one plus there? I'm going to throw in an error. It's like, what are we trying to assign to here? You have 2 in this particular instance because it's current student equals plus plus student ID. It's adding it beforehand. If I said current student ID equals student ID plus plus, I'm going to have 2 101s. Does that make sense?
No, I'm lost.
Okay.
Count plus plus and
Yes. Count plus plus will increment by 1 after the function is done, or that iteration of the loop. Plus plus count increases it by 1 before it starts.
before it starts the function.
Right. It's a predecessor. If you look at count, whatever side it's on will tell you when it adds that extra
Okay,
number to it.
that makes perfect sense. It's just like left to right.
Exactly.
Okay.
See, in the way it starts out here, student ID is 100. Student ID plus plus will assign the value of 100 to start with. The next one would be 101. The next one would be 102. But if I said student ID started with 101, I'd have 101 and 101 showing. If I did it beforehand, does that make sense? I mean, you can really screw it up. Just got to watch which side you're going to put your operator on.
And be consistent.
Yes.
Well, you would kind of be able to tell, like, if it didn't have the intended desired effect, you would just be like, oh, let me switch that around.
Exactly. But when you're talking 5 million lines of code that you type up and then you test it, then you're like, oh, you're going to have tons of errors. That's why you do one function at a time.
Yes.
Assignment operators, again, you can do compound modulus, you can do compound division, multiplication, subtraction, plus equals, minus equals, all that stuff.
Compound modulus.
Yes. All it does is it takes the remainder of what it is and assigns it to
It's
something.
actually into the variable.
Yep,
Okay.
that's all it does. And comparison operators, again, we're just comparing the two sides, whether you double equal, triple equal, whatever. There you go. The strict equal, the not strict equal. The not strict equal gets very interesting. What it does is it returns to you, they're not equal and they're not of the same type. So if I'm comparing John and 38, I'd use a not equal, so it'll look to see if they are equal. Because, for example, B and 1011, right? If I did that, what would it tell me? Are they equal? Huh? Are they equal? How many think they're equal? 1011 and B. How many think they're equal? Raise your hands. How many think they're not? 10, 11, and B. Why don't you go look through conversion and see?
Well, the ASCII value, which is what I would think of B, would be 66.
It's not an ASCII value. B would you get a if you convert that, you'd convert it to hex. The B in this instance is a hex value. Oh, dang it. TJ?
Well, if it's true, how's it 2 digits?
I'm not answering any more questions about it.
He's good at that.
No, now I know what he's going to try to do, and now he's not going to get any answers from me. Okay. Conditional operator can execute one or two different ways. You can do expressions like a conditional expression. You can set it to be true, or you can set it to look at false. Either way. Those are the two ways that you can do conditionals. Is it true or is it not true? All right. Logical operators. Oh, daggone it. I can't talk about this one. Huh? No. I'm just thinking of riddle 2. Okay, special operators. Boy, how many of y'all are getting freebies tonight? You're not going to get number 3, so that'll be good. Property access, if I'm trying to get to something, it's just the period, the variable of something. Like a value. So let's say, Scott, and I'm looking for the attribute of a certain type. It would be the type dot the attribute. Does that make sense? That's what a property access does. And special operators, you can do it with number strings, booleans, objects, functions, or undefined. Associativity, left to right, right to left. We can do it both ways. But you need to make sure you use it the same way. If you're going to use it in one function, you're going to use it the same way throughout your program. Because if you do it in opposite, you're going to cause yourself a world of hurt. All right? Evaluating associativity. Multiplication divisions are on the same level. So then what do? We do left to right. Addition and subtraction are on the same level. Then we do left to right. Okay?
Now, if you need to override that, you can use parentheses, correct?
Yes. So if I do x equals y times equals plus plus x, I've now changed it from right to left. The 2 doors cause all the loudness. That's fine. Is there any questions? Did I thoroughly confuse y'all tonight?
Not too bad.
Someone's going to have an extra hard final exam now. Making one just for you, DJ. Alrighty.
That actually was not intentional.